Hello, valued viewers. I hope you're all doing very well. This video describes the principal reason as to why the Union Pacific Railroad developed the 4884 Big Boy in order to defeat one of its two main nemesis on its main lines, the Wasatch Mountains. The name Big Boy is aptly used to describe the 4884 locomotives that possessed a combination of size, weight, power, and strength that was unrivaled in any other steam locomotive ever built. Even though they were exceeded in some of these characteristics on an individual basis by other locomotives in American manufacture, but in overall terms, however, it can be rightly said that the Big Boys represented the apogee of steam locomotive design, manufacture, and operations. The origins of this 4884 design can be discerned in the recovery of the U.S. economy during the late 1930s, as remedial financial measures, including much greater spending of defense matters, boosted the industry and so helped the nation overcome the last stages of the Great Depression that followed the financial crash of 1929. It was then in 1940 that the Union Pacific Railroad approached the American Locomotive Company with a request for a locomotive design able to handle trains somewhat heavier than those currently being the norm. And more specifically, the Union Pacific Railroad needed this new locomotive. At that point of time, the grade on the route extending west from Cheyenne was 1.55%, and that was on Sherman Hill, while the maximum altitude attained was 8,013 feet, also at Sherman Summit. East from Ogden, the crossing of the Wasatch Range had to be effected via a climb of 60 miles, much of its grade at a 1.14%, as the route climbed from 4,300 feet to 7,230 feet. And consequently, the task of the Union Pacific Railroad set to the American Locomotive Company was this design of a locomotive had to be able to work a 3,600-ton train without assistance on this Wasatch Mountain climb. The design, which resulted from what was in effect a joint enterprise between engineering teams of the American Locomotive Company and the Union Pacific Railroad, was completed in only 6 months. And this had the Union Pacific Railroad ordering no less than 201 initially of the resulting behemoths at a unit price of slightly more than $250,000, which in today's term is nearly $5.5 million per locomotive. Meanwhile, before taking possession of these new giant locomotives, the Union Pacific Railroad was much occupied with tasks that had to be completed before the new locomotives could enter operational service. And this included the removal of the existing track in favor of a 130-pound steel track. And at its stations, new turntables had to be installed that had a diameter of 135 feet, specifically at Ogden and Green River. And this had to be done not to allow the new locomotives to pass along the curves, for they were in fact amazingly flexible in this respect and could cope with curves of a radius as small as 95 yards. This was actually done to avoid the possibility of long overhangs touching trains passing in the other direction along the parallel track. For instance, on a curve of a 145-yard radius, the front of the boiler of a Big Boy locomotive moved sideways some 2 feet, whereas on good alignments the maximum speed was some 70 miles an hour. Operational experience gradually revealed that the Big Boys were in fact capable of working loads somewhat heavier than that of which they had been designed for. Big Boy did in fact reveal that it could haul 6,000-ton trains up the grades of even the Wasatch Mountain or Sherman Hill. September 9th, 1941 was a day of history for the Union Pacific Railroad. Its first Big Boy arrived at Ogden at 3:30 a.m. and on that same day, their new Big Boy would head east with its first eastbound train up the mountain grade it was designed to conquer, the Wasatch Mountains. The Wasatch grade was a sustained 1.1% uphill climb along Utah's Weber Canyon to Echo. And that's where the train would take a turn away from Weber Canyon and make its way up to Echo Canyon to the top of the Wasatch Mountains at Union Pacific's Wasatch Station, 5 miles west of the Utah-Wyoming state line. The Big Boy was named Titan of the Wasatch for a reason. It was designed to climb one of the toughest railroad grades in the United States, an uphill grade that has always been a consideration for nearly all the Union Pacific locomotives, whatever their design. Starting at 4,298 feet of elevation at Ogden, the grade climbs to 6,799 feet at Wasatch. That's 2,501 feet in a distance of 65 miles, an average climb of 38.47 feet per mile. So when the Big Boy arrived in 1945, the Wasatch Grade was a modern double-track railroad with modern traffic controls. In 1916 and 1917, the Union Pacific expanded what was a single-track line into a double-track line. The second main line was better engineered than the original single track and was completed with a grade of that 1.14% compared to the original line's 1.72% climb. Because of its easier climb, the second track became the eastbound uphill track. Several line changes further eased the route, but the uphill climb was always a tough one. To ease the grade on the new second track at Wasatch, a tunnel was constructed at the summit. Helpers continued on to Evanston, where they were cut off and returned to Ogden. A Y track was added at Wasatch in 1921 to shorten this return trip. This new Y track was at the summit, and its eastern end connected with Wasatch siding. The Y track was aligned along the south side of the new tunnel, with its trail track pointing still further to the south. And due to the clearances of the new Big Boy steam locomotive, the Wasatch Tunnel was retired in 1943 and replaced by a deep open cut located between the tunnel and the original main line. The Y was also retired and replaced by a new Y on the north side about 1/4 mile to the east. These new Big Boys would be used between Ogden, Utah and Green River, Wyoming, and will permit the discontinuance of helper locomotives up to 1.14% grade from Ogden to Wasatch, Utah, some 65 miles, with substantial savings in expense. For over 6 years, Big Boys were used almost exclusively for which they were designed, which was to move a 3,600-ton train east from Ogden to Green River at a sustained 18 miles per hour. While the specific tonnage for any given train varied from as low as 3,400 tons to as much as 4,000 tons, the performance of the Big Boy never varied. The locomotives did exactly what they were designed for. Although traffic continued to grow and helper locomotives were not entirely banished from the Wasatch grade, Big Boy took many trains to the top of Wasatch unassisted, doing a job that always took 2 locomotives to perform. The length of the Big Boy and its needed clearances caused a lot of track work between Ogden and Green River to be changed. In anticipation of the first delivery in 1941, all during the summer of that 1941, almost every curve was realigned as mentioned earlier. Gateway siding just east of the Devil's Gate Bridge was retired because it was not possible to realign the siding without interfering with adjacent super elevated curve. Heavier 130-pound rail was laid and new ballast was applied. Big Boy was the biggest it could possibly be. To do more to accommodate a larger or heavier locomotive would have meant that the entire railroad, including all of its tunnels and its bridges, would have to be replaced. Big Boy was as big as the Union Pacific could economically squeeze onto its route up to the Wasatch and across Wyoming. The tenders for the Big Boy were designed to carry a full load of coal and water to pull a 3,600-ton train from Ogden to Echo. At Echo, each locomotive was refueled for the continued trip to Evanston and then to Green River. By 1940, the growing fleet of diesels, EMD F3s and F7s, which did not need to stop at Echo for refueling and water, made Big Boy's assignment on the Wasatch more costly. Big Boy was moved east to operate between Cheyenne and Green River, along with a fleet of large Challengers that had been purchased for that same run. And by 1957, steam power between Ogden and Green River was only the 7 Challengers in helper service. While the Big Boys ran between Ogden and Green River with some running through Cheyenne, the 4000s were used west of Green River during the Korean War, as well as the fruit and vegetable rushes from California. Also, the Union Pacific used the Western Pacific's 4664s in helper service in 1950 and 1951 out of Ogden to Wasatch. These were used with both the turbines and the 4000s. And with that, I will wrap up this video, and I shall end it by saying thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed today's content, please hit the like button. And also, if you've not subscribed, please do so. Both features help the channel grow immensely. And also visit our print shop at Nickel Plate Limited on Etsy.com. And we thank you once again.